Hey guys, it's Kat and I'm back. And I came back real quick because I was like, oh my gosh, I just reviewed my video of the Seven and I was thinking, oh, I missed something there. And as I was also listening to it, I thought about the aspects of the Seven and who they might actually represent, and some clarity came to me. So, quick recap, if you didn't look at my previous video about uh, religions and how they're going to conglomerate, or in my discussion about the Seven, uh, in the Game of Thrones, you get this repetition. What was before will come again. And, Zora High was before, came again. The others were before, and they're coming again. The winter, etc., etc. So, so the idea that things repeat is very clear in the Game of Thrones. And I talked about in the last video about what signs that we had that told us that the Seven were going to repeat as well. And these signs included Sansa sewing a costume or some clothes for Jon and a cloak, and she tells him that she made it just like father's. And then later, Arya is in the temple of the Faceless Men, who serve the god of many faces, and she's talking about who she's supposed to kill and why should she kill this person because she doesn't seem that bad. And the guy answers her and says, does death only come for bad people? And the answer is no, because we know that death comes for everybody. Death is the dude with the great scythe, and poor, rich, young, old, the clergyman, the pope, the king, etc. Everybody eventually dies, and there's no escaping it. So, and we think that's Arya in some respects, because Arya, she's the assassin. She's the faceless person in the night that's going to take the people, right? Sansa is the maid, and I talked about how she's still the maid even though she's not a maid anymore, and that's partly the fault of the freaking HBO series, and as opposed to the books, and that who was the crone, who was the builder, and who was the smith. And I said that I thought that the builder was Tyrion, because the builder, after all this catastrophe happens in this significant cultural and social change and organizational change, somebody's going to have to put it back together, and it's not going to be the king. I don't think Tyrion takes the throne as the king, although he might be a somewhat decent king, but he's more of a politician, and that's the dudes that are on the sidelines that are putting things together, and working with all the different parts of the bureaucracy that'll be like the Meisters and the religion, the faith, and the government itself, and to try to reorganize. So I think that's Tyrion. The crone is the one I said, oh gosh, I forgot about this thing that happened in the books that hasn't happened yet in the series, but potentially might be about to happen. So a spoiler alert if you haven't read the books and you're not sure what's going to happen in the next part of the series, but in the books, that's your pause to leave if you don't want to be spoiled. In the books, Caitlin Tully is brought back to life, but her skin is white and waxen and droopy, and she looks like, in the pictures that were drawn, she looks like the crone in the Faith of the Seven. And the crone is kind of heartless. She's not she doesn't love like the mother. She just says what is and will be. And kind of no escaping it, and that's going to be Lady Stoneheart. She has no heart. So whoever's Lady Stoneheart, there's some speculation that the series is trying to turn Sansa into Dark Sansa, who will be Lady Stoneheart as well, but I don't know. I don't think so, because it has to in some way incorporate this Seven that was and will be again. So let's talk about the Smith. that was the one part, that was the one aspect that I forgot to talk about uh, in the past video, and I think it's really interesting about the legends and myths surrounding the smiths, the blacksmiths, in our real history. So I did another video in which I talked about Azor Ahai and King Arthur and Waylon the blacksmith, and I didn't mention in that video this one thing about Waylon the blacksmith. So Waylon is in mythology, Welsh mythology, this fantastical blacksmith who can create the strongest, sharpest weapons, the best swords in the nation, and he is captured, his family is slaughtered. This king takes him and places him in his forge and tells him, make me a sword, and you're not leaving here till you make me a sword. But to keep him there so he cannot escape, you know what the king does to Waylon the blacksmith? He cuts his Achilles tendons. Yep. So Waylon cannot walk by himself in the forge while he's forging this sword, which he'll eventually use to kill the king. He is using crutches to get around. He, pulls himself around and climbs on the furniture and things of that nature in order to do his smith work. There's another blacksmith in history that was somewhat famous, or not history, legend, that people should know about. He was also crippled. That was Hephaestus, or Vulcan, whichever aspect of him, Roman or Greco, that you like to think about. He was the god of the forge. He made fantastical weapons and other devices, right? He made himself a device in order to get around. He would make these toys, these automatons, things like that. But so the smith of the gods was crippled in Greek mythology. So who is going to be the smith in the seven? Bran. Earlier in the other video, I was like, oh, maybe Bran's the crone because, the thing about prophecies and the ambiguity for gender. But nope. I think all of the genders are going to remain appropriate. The people's genders who represent those personas will remain appropriate. And so the crone will, and so the smith will, and so will the aspects of the smith. He will be crippled, and it'll be Bran. And the reason that I say it's Bran, not just because of known mythology and known famous blacksmiths. Bran received some important knowledge while he was in the tree. So he found out how the children of the forest made the others by shoving dragon's glass into their hearts imbued with evil. And we know that dragon glass weapons will destroy the others and the undead dead. So somebody's going to make these dragon glass weapons. Or somebody's going to be the guy that says, hey, I know what weapons we need to make. And then there's this prospect of the Valyrian steel shattering the weapons also of the others. So remember, Jon is above the wall. He's at Hardhome. He's duking it out. And you can see my other video about why Jon was invulnerable to death and Millicent didn't bring him back, because he defeated death at Hardhome. Go check that out and I'll tell you what it is. But anyways, he whips out his Valyrian sword and he smashes the weapon of the other and he kills the other with his Valyrian sword. And many people speculate that Valyrian swords were in fact forged in the fire of dragons. So dragon glass is made by dragon fire coming onto some object. We know that glass is made out of sand. And actually obsidian, though, is lava, is a hardened form of lava that may have mixed with sand. So, but it needs dragon fire. So that's why Bran is the smith, because he got this knowledge while he was hanging up there with Bloodraven. So there you go. That's my idea who the seven is. And one aspect or one concept here that I wanted to also explore a little bit is, how do normal people become representative of these persons in faith? You know, Saint Catherine, for instance, was a real woman. Saint Barbara was a real woman. People say that Saint George was a real man. So they were real people that did something at some point, and they became canonized in the Catholic Church, and that's how they became these saints or these aspects. And we obviously think, for instance, that Mary, the Virgin Mary, was a real woman. So, oh, which reminds me about the maid in Sansa, and why I said she's still the maid. And you could check out my other video, but basically anything about her having sex or being previously married will either disappear, or it will become a matter of faith that the maid had been promised to marry 3 times and they were never consummated, so she remained the maid. That is one of my theories, and there's not going to be anybody left to contradict that story. Oh, and the father. So Raw Wrist, I said go check out Raw Wrist, because she had this video that actually inspired me, where she talked about the Starks being in the, being the aspects of the 7. Ned was the father, Catelyn was the mother, and Sansa was the maid, and Robb was the warrior. And she thought at that point that Bran was possibly the crone, that ambiguity about gender. Rickon maybe the builder. Arya was the faceless one, and I can't remember who she said, the smith. But go check out her video. It's Raw Wrist, RAWRIST, and she has that, and that was the inspiration for this. So about the father, she said the father was Ned, and I said in the other video, well, I'm not sure that Ned could be the father. Why wouldn't that be Jon if he's receiving the gift to be like the father? Since Ned lost his head. But thinking about faith and how things happen in faith, and speaking of people being canonized, I thought about the potential that Ned could still be the father and could be canonized later as being like the first saint or person to be sacrificed in the name of this new faith. But I'm not sure that's 100% true. I'm kind of thinking with the conglomeration of the faiths, as I'm talking about in other videos, that that's what we're going to see, and that we're going to see that R'hllor will become the high god or the father, sort of like a Catholic faith, and that the drowned men, the aspect of the drowned man that will come back, will be in the concept of the Savior. What was dead will come again. It will rise again, right? So Azor Ahai, he'll be the Messiah. So he'll somehow get mixed up in there, I think. So there's my thoughts about the 7. Tell me what you think about it. If you think there's somebody else who represents some aspect of the 7 that will take a place here, let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to talk about it. See you guys later.